So this evening we continue in our series, Help Wanted, looking at various Psalms and how we can turn to our Lord in our time of need. Last week we talked about the valley of the shadow of death, in which we find our existence. That valley that casts its long shadow over everything that we know. Today, from the depths, is a different focus on the complexity of our lives, looking at Psalm 130. Read a story about two men walking along a steep cliff at night, and one of them slips and falls over the cliff. The other man comes carefully to the edge and calls out, "Are you okay?" Voice comes back, "Yes." "Are you hurt?" "No." "How far did you fall?" "I don't know, I haven't reached the bottom yet." Sometimes we live life at the bottom. Psalm 130 begins with these words, "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord." From the depths we can't see much. We're down in the bottom, in the pit, in the chasm that we can find ourselves. We just can't see much. It's okay in the Grand Canyon to look around at the scenery. Those rocks carved, sandstone or limestone or whatever the side of the Grand Canyon is made from. That's nice to look at. Or if you're scuba diving and you're down in the depths, looking around at fish and coral and, as long as there's not dangerous things like sharks coming at you. I've never scuba dived. I don't know exactly what that's like, but I've snorkeled and enjoyed it. That's okay, but in the depths that we often find ourselves in, we can't see much, and sometimes we feel surrounded by our problems, like the walls are closing in, and we can only see really the issues that we're facing. It feels like all we can see in front of us, and we feel alone. Have you felt that way? Like no one has been down this road before. No one has experienced what I'm going through. We're separated from other people, even feeling separated from God. Abandoned, afraid, stuck. Maybe we respond with anger or stress or sorrow. Where do we turn? The temptation is to turn inward, to look to ourselves for some extra capacity that we hadn't had before. We hear stories of people who've overcome, who've found a way to pick themselves up and dust themselves off and press through. Those stories that get celebrated where people who have overcome obstacles, challenges in life and done well. And so the temptation that we face is to figure out how to do that. Or maybe we're just somewhat embarrassed about the problems that we're having. We want to keep the problems private because it's personal. It's a struggle, and maybe we want to put on that brave face and feel and appear strong before other people. Our pride can get in the way. Or maybe we convince ourselves that we should just get over it. Because sometimes that message can come back to us that we shouldn't have these problems, that we shouldn't have these struggles, that whatever we're facing isn't as bad as maybe we've imagined it to be. Or we're tricked into believing that no one else is going through anything. Because we look around and because other people look like they've got it all together. When maybe they're putting on the same brave face that we're trying to wear. So we look inward, we look around, we seek solutions, or at least relief. And some of those things can end up being destructive. Self-medicating is a word that we know, and a behavior that we've seen or maybe engaged in from time to time, turning to substances for relief. Some people engage in self-harm. For others, it's relationship destruction. Destructive behaviors that are really a cry for help, but just complicate life. Some of the things that we do might be helpful, though. We can reach out to a trusted friend. Paul got a contact this week out of the blue from a person that we hadn't seen or really heard from for quite a long time, and it was a place we used to live. So at first I was leery, like this is somebody's like hacked that account, and so I said, well, ask how your relationship started, or something that might not be able to be figured out through social media investigation, right? Well, the answer came back, and it was obvious this is actually the person and not some random hack. So they ended up speaking on the phone, and this person's life is really difficult. And I don't have any permission to go into any of the details, but it was reaching out to a friend, someone that could be trusted, someone that felt safe, someone that maybe isn't nearby, so isn't invested in any of these relationships anymore. Sometimes we need a person we can turn to because we need someone we can confess to, someone who feels safe, someone with whom we can be vulnerable. And sometimes people that are close by, that are still in the circles in which we move, might not feel that way. Counseling can help. Seminars and sessions can help build up our reserves. Books and blogs and other reading can be beneficial. But the source of the agenda or the aim that a person might have is important to understand as well. Not all help is the same, and not all sources are created equal. But here's a cliche. When you hit rock bottom, there's nowhere else to go but up. And for tonight, maybe we'll just put a little twist on that. When we hit rock bottom, there's nowhere else to look but up. We look up. We cry out for help, and we understand in those kind of moments that we are not alone. We're not alone. Other people have been or currently are in the depths. It might look different. Each of us has a unique set of circumstances in which we live, a unique pattern of life, unique things that we're dealing with. My suffering is unique to me, yours is to you. We've all suffered something. Anyone not? Anyone in the room never ever go through the depths? I thought so. We're common in that. It's a common experience of us. We've all suffered something, loss or pain or anguish or guilt or shame or fear. We've all been through it. Hayden Planetarium in New York City at some point advertised in the city's newspapers the opportunity to make the first journey to another planet and invited people to submit an application to be part of this. Ran the ad, put that out there, and more than 18,000 people applied. So all those applications were given to a panel of psychologists who, looking at the various ways that those applications were done, and I'm not sure what it all entailed, but determined that the vast majority of those people wanted to start a new life on another planet because they were so discouraged with the life that they had. 18,000 people in New York City, that's hardly anybody, right? Well, that's only 18,000 who responded. How many people have faced discouragement? People in the Bible have been through it. David, who's the possible author of this psalm, although it's not identified, a lot of psalms will say of David or something similar, or the other authors who wrote in the psalms. But David, whom we know, who's considered, right, the man after God's own heart, faced struggles with Saul and sins and his sons. That all combined was a life that included much suffering. Saul, the king that preceded him, who got so jealous of David that he was like throwing spears at him and chasing him around all over Israel, trying to kill him. Sins that he committed plagued David. In Psalm 51, which we looked at on Ash Wednesday, was his response to sin. And his sons, he lost one son as punishment because of Bathsheba and Uriah and that whole situation. And then another son, Absalom, who wanted to take over the throne and died in battle. David experienced loss and suffering. Saul, that same king, was tormented by a spirit so that he needed David to play the lyre to calm him. Sometimes we might use music in a similar way. So many examples of physical suffering, emotional difficulty, spirits that would plague people in the biblical narrative that we can find them in almost every book and in many chapters of those books. And then there's the gospel reading that we heard tonight, the disciples in the boat who've just left the presence of Jesus, and they're in the boat crossing. It's dark, it's late, fourth watch of the night. They're probably tired. But when they see Jesus walking on the water, they're terrified. Fear overcomes them until they understand that it's Jesus. But like I wanted proof of that person that reached out to Paula, there's Peter looking for proof. Lord, if it's you, tell me how we met. Lord, if it's you, ask me to come out there onto the sea. Come on. And Peter gets to walk on the water. How cool is that? Until he starts to sink and cries out in his fear. Notice where he was looking. Verse 30 of Matthew 14, you've probably seen this before. When he saw the wind, he was afraid, and he cried out. Even Jesus. My God, why have you forsaken me? Words that we'll look at next Friday from Psalm 22, but on the lips of Jesus, meaning so much more depth to those words. So in the Bible, we can find all these examples of people who've been through a lot, and people of God who've been through it as well, who are since the Bible was written. Charles Spurgeon, a well-known English preacher, in his biography it says this: "What he suffered in those times of darkness we may not know. Even his desperate calling on God brought no relief. There are dungeons," Spurgeon said, "beneath the castles of despair." Martin Luther used the word Anfechtung to describe what his life was like from time to time. And that word doesn't really have a good English translation. There's not a good equivalent to it, but it implies terror and despair due to an inability to trust God's goodness. That's Martin Luther, whom we place so much value in the things that he did and his accomplishments in the founding of the Protestant Reformation. And he didn't really want his name on the church, but it's been on the church for more than 500 years. Anfechtung, despair, the inability to trust in God's goodness. All these people have been down this road, have been to the depths. What we've been through, what we might be going through even right now, isn't unique. Well, it is unique what we're individually, but going through something isn't. But tonight, be reminded of this: God hears our cry. He heard the cry of his people from Egypt. After 400 years of slavery, he heard the cry of Peter when he was walking on the water. And the psalmist begins with these words, "Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleas for mercy." This isn't the psalmist trying to convince God to hear him. It's the knowledge that he does. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord, hear my cry. And we know this, he does. There's a promise in Romans 8 at verse 26. We do not know what to pray for as we ought. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. There are lots of places where God promises to hear, to answer, even to intercede for us. When we're in the depths and we don't even know how to respond, we don't even know what to pray, the Spirit brings our intercessions with groanings too deep for words before the throne of God's grace, where they're heard, where they're answered. Hear how Psalm 130 promises us release. Here's how it goes on. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness that you may be feared. If the burden is guilt, there's release. Because with the Lord there is forgiveness. We've probably all carried guilt around for some time. Maybe a short time, maybe a long time, maybe still. With the Lord there is forgiveness. There's forgiveness in Jesus, in his sacrifice for us. There's wholeness, there's healing, there's redemption in that comes to us today and now and each day, because the mercies of God are new each morning. And the grace of God covers us completely. He forgives, lifting the burden of our guilt. The psalmist goes on, I wait for the Lord, my soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen for the morning. More than watchmen for the morning. You ever waited for morning? Imagine the watchman on the wall. That's not probably that exciting of a job most days. Looking out across toward the horizon, wondering, is anyone coming? And it's dark, and you're tired, and it's swing shift, and it's boring. And you think, wow, if the sun would just come up. Come on, sunrise. And you check your watch. Ugh. But we've waited for the morning, haven't we? Have you woken up in the night? And those things that are in your head start, they jump on that little hamster wheel inside your mind. And it starts squeaking. You got that sometimes? More than watchmen for the morning. I just really want to go back to sleep, but if it's not going to happen, I'm really ready for the morning to be here because I'm ready to be done with this moment. But God gives us hope and rest. We can hope in him who answers our prayer, and we can rest in him with confidence and with trust. Wait for the Lord. There's that verse in Isaiah that they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up on wings like eagles, walk and not grow weary, run and not go weary, walk and not faint, right? Something like that. You know it. Wait for the Lord. And finally in verses 7 and 8, O Israel, hope in the Lord. For with the Lord there is steadfast love, and with him is plentiful redemption, and he will redeem Israel from all his iniquities. Steadfast love. that reaches into the depths, not waiting for us to make our way from the depths back somewhere, but reaches into the depths, into the situation where we find ourselves yet again. Where we cry out to him from the depths, not even sure if he'll hear, because we feel like we're down in the chasm where the walls just echo that sound and all we hear is our own voice coming back to us. But in that depth, God reaches there to find us with his steadfast love, with his redemption, with his grace and his mercy and his kindness. So we can hope in his love. We can hope. There's hope. Even in our times of despair, even in our depths that we experience, there is hope for you and for me, wherever we are, because of our God who is faithful and who loves us. Amen.